Buddy, thanks for coming out. My name is Chris Kowalski. I oversee the government and community relations for Villanova University. Joined here by my colleague Laura Wagner, who also does a lot of the government and community relations, particularly the local and neighborhood initiatives, and Bob Morrow, who oversees our facilities management at Villanova. We're here tonight to talk about the university's long-range development plan. This is something that institutions in the township are required to submit every couple of years or as part of the land development process for a large project. And we have just one of those projects coming up in addition to it being time to submit an updated plan. We anticipate submitting or filing for land development for the addition to our engineering building. You'll hear us refer to that as CEER. CEER, the Center for Engineering, Education, and Research. We were before the zoning hearing board late last year seeking a variance to exceed the height limit on sort of the interior portion of that building, and it was granted. So we'll be proceeding with filing land development for that project sometime this spring, and that is a long and twisty road. So, but as part of that, we'll include this plan, and before we did, we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to talk about it in public. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on the Township's YouTube page. We're grateful to our friends here in the Township, the acting managers here. I see a couple commissioners. Thank you for coming out. And then we'll also have the plan posted both on the Township website, and we'll circulate it via our neighbors' emails. If you have heard about this directly from Villanova, thank you very much for being part of our neighbors' email lists. If you've heard about it from other sources, thanks to our friends for sharing the word. But if you would like to get information directly from Villanova, please give your email address to Laura, and we'll make sure to get you on that list. So Bob is going to go through some of the nuts and bolts, and we'll interrupt each other along the way. But we have plenty of time for questions and answers tonight as well. When we're done with the formal part, we can come up and look at the maps and talk a little bit more in depth. There are a few projects in here that we know we would like to move forward with and have plans for. There are lots of projects in here that do not have that kind of planning or funding. So what we're going to talk about tonight is very much a living document. Everything you see here is not going to be tackled, and certainly not in the time frame presented. But the requirements of the plan are to provide sort of a general outline of what the university's thinking is, so that it gives the township staff, elected officials, and the township residents some sense of those plans, and then we can begin the part of the collaborative process. Any project that's in here is going to go through some sort of township approval process. If it's a very minor project, maybe that's a permit review, but most of these are more than minor, they're major, and so that means we'll be before the Planning Commission, the Board of Commissioners, and in some cases, the Zoning Hearing Board. So there, and for those kinds of projects, we will certainly have dedicated neighbor meetings for them to discuss in more detail. We do have neighbor meetings once a semester, dedicated to just general updates on the university. You will receive that notice from us. But if for these specific projects, we will have specific meetings for those. And then when we come before the township, those also are opportunities for you to participate in the public process. So again, this is just an introduction. Not everything you see here is going to happen or certainly happen in that time frame. But we're looking forward to chatting with you about it, going through some of our thinking, and answering any questions you might have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming out and joining us tonight. So we have 20 projects listed here, and there are copies over here if you'd like one to look at a little more closely. I'm sorry that the graphics don't show up that well on the overhead. There are 20 projects, as Chris mentioned. These are our plans and notional plans. We have a university master plan that's now over 10 years old. I think we did it in 2008, 2009, which is also posted on the Villanova website for all the world to see. Most of these projects are in there as well. As Chris mentioned, some of them we have concrete plans to pursue, and I'll mention those. Others are possibilities, but we're trying to be transparent and show you the projects we're thinking of. We try to show everything that we're aware of today, but things change during the course of time, and sometimes a need pops up or a donor pops up with a special interest, so we have to adapt sometimes. So I'm going to start over on the athletic side, just to get you oriented. There's Lancaster Avenue down the middle. And then the railroad, which shows up as the dark lines there. So over on the east side of our property is the stadium. And the first two projects are around the stadium. One is athletic locker rooms underneath the current bleachers or perhaps in place of the current bleachers. And then on the very eastern end, we have a small snack bar, and we envision renovating that or perhaps adding a level to it, something along those lines. So those are two potential projects in the stadium. The third one is the Falvey Library Complex, which is in the middle of campus. The building was built in two halves, and unfortunately the floors don't line up, so it's an accessibility nightmare. Only the second floor lines up. So our plans there would be to renovate both halves, the old half and the new half. We affectionately call them Old Falvey and Falvey, and perhaps build a small addition on the front that would have some sloped hallways so that you'd be able to get from one level to the other without having to take an elevator. We would also add elevators and make it fully handicap accessible. So that project is in the master planning phase right now, the library.
Bob, can we just go back a little bit and talk about the athletic projects, talk about the rationale for that and the need?
Sure. So under the stadium, in some areas we have locker rooms, and in other areas we're converting storage and things to locker rooms. We did not have very many locker rooms 10, 15 years ago when I arrived here, and now we're trying to create private locker room space for the different teams. We also built a couple years ago the Tally Center, which provides offices for football, strength and conditioning, and those kind of things. So it freed up some of the space under the stadium. We've been slowly going through and renovating that space physically under the stands and creating a series of locker rooms, but we have only done maybe a third of it so far.
There's a lot of stress on all of our buildings, but particularly in our athletic complex. We've tried to maximize the space, but as Bob just said, there's a lot of our programs that do not have dedicated locker rooms. In fact, our world-class, nationally acclaimed, historically significant men's and women's track and field and cross-country teams never had their own locker rooms. They shared them with multiple other programs in the pavilion. So we were just able a couple of years ago to provide that space. So not only are there need for dedicated spaces for students and teams, but administrative space, support space that also doesn't take recreational space offline. So Nevin Fieldhouse, which we'll get to in a minute, is still used as the home court for our women's volleyball team and served when we renovated the pavilion as the home court for the women's basketball team. It's got a lot of administrative functions, but we need to maintain the ability to use it as a competitive venue and a recreational venue as well. Okay, moving on to the fourth project, campus parking structure. So this is over off of Spring Mill Road by the law school, and our plan is to add one level to this garage this summer. As Chris mentioned earlier, we have a project that's under design now to add an addition onto our engineering building, which we call the SEER building. That will require some additional parking, so this would be the project to create that additional parking. It is a precast concrete structure. The additional level would look exactly like the current building, except it would be one level higher. That we went through a design review board for that just last month. And that is planned for this summer?
That's planned for this summer, right. I'm going to switch.
Oh, yeah.
Switching to the Inn, which is a property right down County Line Road at County Line and Matson Ford. We have a historic mansion connected to a hotel complex and a carriage house out by the road. So the first project is to renovate the carriage house. Right now it's just used for storage. It has 3 bays. It was used for horses once upon a time. It has a small apartment that hasn't been used in decades. So our intention is to renovate that and put it to use for the inn. It could be used as a bridal suite. We do a bunch of weddings there and for other purposes. We also are considering relocating one of the entry-exit drives, the one that currently is to the west of the carriage house. We're considering moving to the east to improve sight lines and safety, and also to try to get the headlights out of some of the neighbors that live right across the street from the current driveway. The mansion itself has not been renovated in quite a while, so we have a project to renovate it. It would stay within the existing footprint, just replacing windows, roofing, gutters, and interior finishes, things like that. So those are 2 projects over at the inn.
Can you give context for what we recently did at the inn?
Over the last couple of years, we have renovated the inn. We also used to use Aramark to operate it for us. We now operate it ourselves, or Villanova employees that work at the inn. It has about 50 visitor, guest rooms, hotel rooms, and conference space and wedding space. So we went through and renovated the conference space and the wedding space and the individual rooms over the last 2 years, and now we're kind of turning our attention to the mansion itself to renovate it. Any questions about the inn? Thank you. So back to the main campus, we're on project number 7, which is Tollentine Hall. Tollentine is our oldest and largest academic building. There are 4 or 5 academic departments that have their homes there, 36 classrooms, the president, some of the vice president's offices, so it's a multi-use building. It's built in 3 wings with a C-shaped around the parking lot. Our vision is to gut and renovate the existing building and put a 4th wing on there, completing the square. So the little parking lot in the middle would go away. We would put some sort of glass structure or roof over that to have an indoor courtyard or gathering space, and build a 4th wing. This is long overdue. The building is pretty old. It has yellow tile hallways. It kind of looks like worse than, I think, a high school from the 50s or 40s. It's overdue, but it's difficult because it's 150,000 square feet. So to renovate that, we need some swing space to put those functions, which is not easily available. So I'll talk about some swing space projects in a minute, but renovating Tollentine is on our list of things to do. 7, 8. 8 is the engineering building, which we call SEER. So we have a project to add an addition to it. It's kind of L-shaped, wraps around the Lancaster Avenue side and the lawn side of the current building. We were in front of the zoning hearing board a few weeks ago or a few months ago, seeking zoning relief for the height. So we asked to be able to match the current height. The new addition would match the current height, and we did receive that variance. So we're designing now to match the same height of the building. It would wrap around and kind of cover up the facade that you see from Lancaster Avenue today. Some people aren't that fond of the look and feel of the building. It is kind of modern inside. It's all raw concrete, so we're trying to warm it up a little, and it will more or less match the stone buildings that are on the top of the hill, Tollentine and the chapel. Tollentine and the monastery and the church. So that is under design, and we hope to start construction in a year and a half to 2 years. We will go through the land development, the township approval process for that, starting in a few months. Any questions so far? Am I going too quickly?
Sarah.
Yes, Sarah.
You're going to make any effort to add solar panels to the top of that garage that you're going to add a layer to?
So we are not at the moment. We did consider solar panels. It adds another level to the building and would probably require another height variance. So we're torn between staying within the zoning requirements and that. The other thing is it's not that many square feet. Sadly for us, in terms of solar power, most of our buildings have pretty pitched slate roofs, and many of them do not face south. So we do have some solar panels on a few buildings, but it's more for educational purposes and doesn't generate a significant amount of electricity. So.
I'd love to see you break the glass ceiling with the township so that at least 8 feet of solar panels go on top of the old height. It would be a groundbreaker for us.
It's a possibility. Again, we're torn between trying to stay within the code and doing the right thing energy-wise. So we did just make a purchase of renewable energy. So 50% of our purchase power is renewable today for the next 3 years. Just made a 3-year purchase in January. Okay, moving down to the intersection at Ithan and Spring Mill Road.
Spring Mill and Lancaster.
Sorry, Spring Mill and Lancaster, where Aldwin Lane comes in. So there are 2 bank buildings there, the Santander bank buildings. Villanova owns those properties, and they are currently leased. The lease expires in December of 2021. So at that time, we intend to occupy the buildings, renovate them, and perhaps use them as swing space for a renovation of Tollentine that I mentioned a minute ago. But those 2 together are 70,000 square feet, and Tollentine's 150,000, so it's still not quite enough space. Those are zoned commercial office, so we'd only put office functions in there, perhaps the faculty and some of the administrative offices. We would not put classrooms down there. We'd have to find another solution for the classrooms. It's not in numerical order, but next to that is a little stub of road of Aldwin Lane. So today, Aldwin comes into the intersection at Lancaster and County Line Road and takes up 1 cycle of the light. So over the years, we've had many traffic studies, and one of the things that the traffic engineers recommend to improve that intersection for all of us would be to remove that leg of the light, thereby giving a few more seconds to all the other legs, and we would potentially reroute it through the parking lot of the Santander Bank building so it comes in perpendicular to Spring Mill Road. We just hired a traffic engineer to review that. There are possible issues with sight lines. The railroad is just to the left of that space that goes overhead. So you need a certain amount of sight lines and things like that. So we're reviewing the possibility. We think if we could do that, it would be a benefit to everyone who drives through that intersection. Again, we're just investigating the feasibility of it at this point. But because we own the land, we'd be willing to give up the land to put the road, reroute the road through the parking lot and then close off the part of the road that enters the intersection today.
So just to reiterate a couple of things and expand a little bit. This is not something that we're going to do. This is something that we'd like to explore. We've talked in a very preliminary way with PennDOT and the Township, and I think there's interest in exploring what could happen here. We think there would be benefits that Bob just mentioned. In addition, our understanding is that the bridge that's there at Aldwyn is not tall enough to allow all emergency vehicles through. There's an opportunity to lower the road there as well so that we could add that capability in there. If this were to come to pass, we would make sure that there was no access to the campus from Aldwyn Lane. So this wouldn't be a cut through to get to your parking spot if you work in one of these buildings. There would be separation there. It would make the university's campus here contiguous. We'd be able to not only remove Aldwyn Lane as a turn and as a part of that cycle, we'd also be able to eliminate the driveway here, which is the last remaining driveway to our what we call our technology services building. Some may know it as the Keating building. So we would be excited about this if it all worked out and if all parties agreed that it was, and the residents who live in those neighborhoods behind it all agreed that it was something that would add benefit and value. Bob did reference that there have been traffic studies. The Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission did 2 studies. While our Lancaster Avenue development process was going on, there was a larger study of the Route 30 corridor and then a smaller study of just the part of Route 30 in Radnor Township. And both of those recommended not just removing Aldwyn Lane, but Kenilworth, if possible, to allow for freer moving traffic at that intersection. It's very inefficient right now to have 6 cycles on that one intersection. Anybody who's been there on foot or in a car knows that there's a lot of wasted time at that intersection. That combined with adding a traffic adaptive system as planned for that corridor, we think could really improve traffic and safety in that area. Another benefit would be we can continue our sidewalk work that we've done along 1.5 miles plus of our campus, move it away from the street and increase pedestrian safety. Yes?
If Aldwyn Lane terminated on Route 320, would a car be able to go either direction?
So the question is, and I recognize this is being televised, so I'll repeat the question. Bob, we could do this too, into the mic. It was a question about how would that intersection work. That's one of the big considerations that we need to come up with. Ideally, it would be a full intersection, left and right. We're not sure we're going to be able to pull that off. And then would it still be as attractive if it was just right turn in, right turn out? You know, that would be a question that we would ask everybody to weigh in on. Ideally, you'd like it to be a full intersection, but with between the sight lines that we have to account for with a railroad trestle and the distance to the intersection with Lancaster Avenue, it may not be worthwhile. So that's where the preliminary engineering comes in. Yes, Anna Marie.
Right now, you're coming west as a pedestrian, on either side, not to go north.
Yep.
Once you reach Aldwyn, which is kind of it's not a great crosswalk, and then you have to go west, there's a very short crosswalk light for buttons. The buttons are not much.
Yep.
And sometimes not responsive. Do you plan to make pedestrian crossings right for that intersection?
Let me paraphrase the question for the listening audience. Are we planning pedestrian improvements at that intersection as well, dealing with the cycles? all preliminary at this point. I would hope we would be able to address that. If you take spokes off of or cycles off of the intersection, theoretically you have more time at the crossings you can dedicate to pedestrians. I'm officially over my skis as a non-traffic engineer, but I use that intersection often as a pedestrian, and I'm hoping personally for pedestrian improvements there.
And have you discussed with Matt or whoever, I don't know who's responsible for this, but on the south side of the intersection of the top three counties, when you further pedestrian access along that, where someone could choose to cross later if they don't have the light when they're going west.
We have not discussed any further pedestrian, we have not discussed, period. It's just, hey, what would you think? We love the idea. Bring us an engineer drawing and let's talk some more. And that's basically what everybody has said. So that's where we are. Gotcha. Anybody else before we move on? Okay.
So we're St. Mary's? Yep. So next is St. Mary's. This is the former seminary, current multi-use building. It has dormitory, cafeteria, and athletic facilities inside it. We hope to renovate and replace the roof. And the wing that's closest to the railroad tracks there is currently an athletic wing. It has a swimming pool that is defunct, has a basketball court, has locker rooms. We would consider tearing it down and building a slightly larger facility, perhaps with an elevated track. It would be a recreation-type facility for all of our students. That's more in the nice-to-have category. We don't have any firm plans for that just yet. 10, 11, health services, parking garage. So back on the other side, down the tracks by Ithan Avenue, we have currently a ground level plus one level deck at the health services building. That's giving us some problems in terms of rust and decay, so we're considering replacing that, possibly with 2 levels. It's fairly small, but if we could get 2 levels there, it could get us a little bit more parking. So that's one of the possible future projects. Next is an academic building next to our current Driscoll Hall. God bless you. Our nursing building was built with the future idea of having a mirror image building there. It would be academics with classrooms and really functions to be determined. It's one of the potential sites on our campus master plan. It could be something we could build first and then use as swing space to renovate Tollentine, so that's one of the possible future projects that we're considering. Go across the Welcome Center, or want to do the garage? Okay, so next to that site is our current SAC parking garage behind Connolly Center, if you've ever driven there. It's a current rectangular garage. If and when we build new space, we're required to build additional parking, so we're trying to strategize where would be the best places to put that parking. We mentioned just a minute ago the health services garage adding 1 level. That would just get us small number, maybe 40 or 50 spaces. But if we build an addition onto the current SAC garage, we could get 3 levels of parking and a significant number of spaces. That's one of several potential sites for parking. We haven't decided on any of those except for the law school, where we plan to add 1 level this summer. Moving over down below Sear is another potential site. Right there's a little road that dead ends into a gate on Spring Mill Road, and there's some surface parking there, and there's a hill that slopes down. If we were to build parking there, we could tuck it into the hill, so 1 level is accessible below and 1 level is equal to the ground level up above, potentially. So that's another potential site right next to the engineering building. And the last one is on West Lancaster Avenue behind the little houses, where we not so long ago put in surface parking back there. So that's a potential site for a parking structure, not currently favored, but it is a possible site where we could put some additional structured parking.
So I will modify the term best. These are not projects that we would like to take on. We believe we have enough parking to meet our needs. None of these plans envision an increase in undergraduate enrollment. Our enrollment has remained steady for the last 2 decades. But the township's code includes provisions that whenever you add space, you have to add parking. So we wouldn't be responsible if we didn't include provisions for additional parking as part of these projects. So as we go through, project by project, we will make the case that we have enough parking. These are what are envisioned as potential solutions if we had to move forward with adding parking. So none of them are ideal. I see some friends here from Aldwin Lane. This is not ideal. I recognize that. This is not ideal across from the Connolly Center on that open space, especially when you consider that this is grass right now. It has a extensive stormwater management research facility. You take into consideration the new academic building that would take away the university's one out of two sets of outside basketball courts and tennis courts. Down here, building into the hill would displace, again, some other uses. So our first priority will be to avoid having to add these if at all possible. But again, because of the way the township's code is written, we have to show that. I'm not trying to malign the township's code, but
Do the Welcome Center.
16 is Jake.
Okay, we didn't finish the blue, though. We went out of order.
We did? Oh, we missed the Welcome Center?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
So next, right across the street from the church is a small dormitory we call Moriarty Hall. And one concept would be to replace that, tear it down and replace it with a welcome center so that potential students and parents who are coming to visit the campus for the first time could pull in there, park in the convenient parking, see a little video, and then begin their tour by walking over the bridge. So it's kind of located where people arrive, and it would be slightly larger than the current footprint of Moriarty Hall. And again, it's one of our potential projects. Let's see. Okay, I think we did. So those are the kind of, all the blue ones are the roughly 1 to 5 year projects. So now slightly further out in the 5 to 10 year category are the following three. The first one is Jake Nevin, which now that we have the beautiful Performing Arts Center across the street is kind of showing its age, has a bunch of cracks. It's been pointed here and there. It doesn't look that great. On the outside, and the inside looks a little worse. Most of the offices on the front facade have routine leaks coming through the walls and roof. So we have hopefully a project in the next 5 to 10 years to renovate it inside and outside. God bless you. Moving down towards the middle of campus, we have St. Rita's. That is currently on the first floor, our campus ministry building. It has a small chapel as well. And upstairs are 2 floors of dorms. That was built in the era when all men came to campus and had a sport coat and 3 shirts. So the closet, literally you put your coat in this way on a little nail. And so the closet's about 6 inches deep. So it doesn't really serve modern purposes, but we still do use it as a dorm. We'd like to renovate it and perhaps turn it into an academic building. It does not have very many rooms, only about 35 or so students live there. So that's St. Rita's. And finally, science and technology. Over on the far side of Mendel Field, which is a circular field there, and right next to Tollentine, we have Whitehall and Old Chem Engineering, which are both engineering buildings. They both have labs and classrooms. As we change the way we teach science and technology, our lab needs are changing, and we envision kind of renovating those 2 buildings and building a building in between them to unite them into a lab or science or technology type building. Again, it's sort of in the 5 to 10 year category. We don't have any specific plans. We did have an artist do a rendering of what it could look like in relationship to Tollentine, where we're considering building that 4th wing. And of course, it looks fantastic, and Father Peter wants to do it right away. But it's not in the near-term future. Any questions about those 3 before we move on to the 10-plus years? So in the further out category, we have 2 projects. One is Mendel. Mendel is our science building. It was built with 2 wings. We added a 3rd wing in the 80s, and it houses most of our labs, biology, chemistry, physics, and computer science. Very difficult to renovate it while it's in use, so perhaps we'd build one of these other academic buildings here, or the one we just spoke about, the brown one there, 18, first to create some new labs, which would then empty some of those labs and let us gut and renovate it. So that's further off, just in the thinking about it stage. And then down close to Lancaster Avenue, we have 3 little houses that were converted into dorms or administrative buildings. We could make better use of that space by tearing down some of those smaller ones and building one more efficient building. It could be dormitory or an academic building. Again, it's one of the potential sites in our master plan, but we don't have any specific plans yet for that site, just a potential building site. So again, as Chris said at the beginning, these are potential projects. Some may happen, some may not, but we wanted to try to be as open and transparent as we could be to show you what our thoughts are as of this moment.
I think that, I'm sorry, one second. The time frame noted here is a little misleading. There's no way we would be able to tackle everything in blue in 1 to 5 years. There's just not. But in trying to prioritize these projects as to which ones rise to the top of importance, these are the ones that we would put first. So again, they're not all happening in this time frame, but this is what we can. This is how we basically rank them in priority fashion. Bill.
Chris, you guys talked about it a moment ago with regard to enrollment, but the one thing that I think people's alarms go off when they hear expansion, additional classrooms, additional this, additional that, is the concern that Villanova is looking to get bigger in terms of enrollment size. So could you just spend another minute talking
Sure.
about what that looks like projected out over the same time period?
Sure.
as this?
So Bill's question was about enrollment, and some questions about what Villanova's plans are and our thinking. Again, none of these projects are part of any plans to increase undergraduate enrollment. For the folks who have this plan and for the folks who look at it online, on page 2 you'll see a chart of our enrollment going back to the mid-'80s. You can see that our undergraduate enrollment went down in the early 90s and has remained fairly steady, and that is the plan that we have moving forward. These plans that you see here we're very fortunate. We're a healthy institution. Not all institutions are healthy, but there's a lot of competition for less college students out there. And we need to make sure that we're providing the best, bless you, the best learning environment, the best resources possible to continue to be a healthy institution and be attractive for exceptional students. So a lot of these projects reflect changing teaching, changing research. Bob just talked about our lab building, and what's different now is than in the past is professors now do research in shared labs versus having, where they might have a bench and they sort of cycle through as their experiments cycle through, whereas before they would have a dedicated lab. So that kind of the space use is changing. Same thing with engineering labs. Classrooms are changing. Technology has certainly shifted in a way where students and teachers are going through the educational process differently. And quite frankly, we're finding a need and a desire for more students to live on campus. The Commons has been a roaring success. Students love living there. And we know that many of our peer institutions, our competitive institutions, are offering more on-campus housing. So, there's a couple of projects in here, maybe one in particular down here. There's one that's farther out that would add beds, but for the beds that we have, we kind of have to spruce them up. There's no more charm in living basic with small closets and no air conditioning. So. This is all meant to maintain our momentum, maintain our health as an institution, and maintain our position as a place where students want to go. We're very fortunate to be in a position where, our number of classroom seats hasn't changed at about 1,670 a year, but our applications continue to be well over 20,000. So this is trying to keep that momentum going. Yes, sir.
Are you trying to phase out part-time undergraduate, or is that just a supply and demand? Trending down?
Yeah, I think we would like to increase that. We'd like to reverse that trend. So if you could take more classes, we'd really appreciate it. So.
Well, jumping back, you mentioned 2,000.
Yes.
Expand the library, or is it simply makes it easier to get more?
That's really for accessibility and for student study space. So, libraries are no longer stacks of books. We envision taking the books mostly out of the upper levels where they are today and putting them all in the basement in compact shelving where you have the big wheels and roll them back and forth. So it's more student study space and programming space.
Our library now is very different from when I was there as a student. You can talk. Right. You can talk, you can eat. There's lots of collaborative workspaces. We've put a lot of our learning resources there, our math center, our writing center, learning support services, tutoring. So it's much more of, it's a library because we still have books and periodicals there, but it's more of a sort of an academic gathering and resource space. And to be able to combine these two buildings, which have needed and used resources, and make it accessible and more efficient, I think is the idea. And it's in the heart of campus. It's really prime real estate. So it's an opportunity to polish it up a little bit too. Any other questions? No? Yes, sir.
When's the stadium going to start? Renovation, that's the first thing.
Go ahead.
So no, it's not necessarily the first thing. I think the adding a level on the garage by law school is probably the first thing. We probably will do some work in the stadium this summer. We're trying to figure out which sections, but it would just be inside, wouldn't be coming outside. At the very end of the stadium where we have the snack bar, that may be a tear down and rebuild a slightly bigger structure there, but that's not planned for the near future.
I would add that the stuff here, more internal, a little bit easier to tackle. This here, there's probably some zoning considerations that we would have to consider before we move forward with anything. No, I think it's important to note for those here and for those who watch this later on, we have excess seating in the stadium, certainly for sporting events. We're full at commencement, we're full on Parents' Weekend, but we can use this space better for various needs outside of just maintaining bleacher capacity. So we want to be conscious of that, and that's sort of what's driving this. There's not a desire to increase capacity or anything like that.
How many parking spots are going to be added to the additional level on the?
Just under 200.
The question was how many spots are going to be added to the law school garage with the additional level, and the answer was just under 200.
Have you considered removing the landscaping from that little circle around it so that Radnor can't set up its speed trap there anymore?
No comment. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there any more thought? I remember when we went through this many years ago, there was talk around the stadium and the noise and the lights and
Mhm.
all that, and then any outside events that would be held there that were non-university type events. Are there plans to increase that activity at all?
I think we're happy with maintaining. We field calls all the time about events there, and we try to accommodate our stuff first. We have an incredible amount of activity, especially during the school year. We were the home for, I think, 3 years for a men's professional lacrosse team, and for 2 or 3 years for a women's professional soccer league. Those events drew 3,000 people a game. Something like that would be a good fit for the community. I think we would entertain, but there's no plans for that right now. We're not looking necessarily to drive tons of activity. I think we would be open to events that meshed with certainly our availability, but particularly that were value added to the community. I think those two leagues in particular were great. A lot of kids came. Anybody else? Okay. Well, we'll stop the formal part. We're going to hang out here. If anybody wants to come up and look at these maps a little more closely, I know they're tough to see on the screen. Again, I want to thank our friends at the Township. I know they'll post this, and we'll send it out as well. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to give you our contact information. Or I recognize a lot of your faces. I think you know how to get in touch with us. But we appreciate you coming out, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.